Hello, it's me again. I'm very excited because I have a friend who's been in this fight for a long time, like me, has been banned from Twitter. Today's guest is Claire Graham. Hello, Claire. How are you doing?
Hi, Graham. I'm good, thanks. How are you?
I'm good. I always like to try and get the size the same. So let me just see if I can. There we go. How's that? How do you say your username again?
MRKH voice.
And what does that mean for the viewers at home?
MRKH is a medical condition I have. It's known as a DSD or intersex condition, and voice is just a word.
Yeah, it was the voice of people with interest. Yeah,
it was my voice. Yeah.
What did you use? What did you use the account for mainly?
Do you want to know why I started it? Is that probably the answer to that question?
Yeah.
Because the people with medical conditions like mine are often spoken about or on behalf of. And I kept seeing women being told that they couldn't talk about their body parts. Like you can't say women have a cervix or women have a uterus or something like that. And I don't have a cervix and I don't have a fully formed uterus, but I don't mind other women talking about theirs. So I started my Twitter account just to say that, really.
Why do trans rights activists talk about intersex people? How do they use intersex people in this debate? To
suggest that biological sex is not a reliable categorization system, I think would best describe the way they use it. So people will say there are males and there are females, and you can't change between the two. And the gotcha is always, what about intersex? That's how it's used. So
what about intersex? Why is it? Why do they think it's such a powerful argument, and why is it not a powerful argument in your view?
They think it's a powerful argument because there's a lot of ignorance about what intersex is. So people, first of all, back off, because if you don't know, you're not going to argue.
So you mean because it's a condition that people are a little bit unclear on, they back off when they hear the word because they don't really feel like they know enough to engage. Is that what you mean?
I think it plays on stigmas, because it plays into the belief that there are people who are not male or female. It's a use of the word, a misunderstanding of the word, that there must be people who are in between. A lot of people think that is a thing. I didn't always realize that the word intersex described me until I started looking into it. And then I realized my medical condition falls under that umbrella. So I had the same misconceptions that maybe there were these people in the middle that we didn't, these really super rare people in the middle that we didn't know much about. And they're utilizing that ignorance in people, I think,
to suggest that there's a third sex.
A spectrum of sex is what they say, not a third sex.
Right. When they say a spectrum of sex, I know there are several intersex conditions that exist along the binary, but they all fall under either male or female. Is that right?
Everyone starts along one developmental pathway or another. And then, of course, growing any body part is quite complicated. So lots of things can go wrong. Everyone starts out as unambiguously male or female, and then things can
happen.
Can go awry along the way. Yeah.
Is it so? Would you say that? So the people who are using intersex conditions in these conversations, what are they trying to do?
The idea is to destabilize the concept of biological sex so that they can suggest that gender identity is the way that society should be organized.
Right.
I think that's the idea behind it. Because it's quite complicated, because there are also some trans people sometimes will believe that they might be intersex because they think that might explain why they feel the way they do. Yes. So there's that as well. So sometimes it's brought in that way as well.
Yeah. So exactly how does one know if one's intersex or not?
You are diagnosed with a DSD by a doctor.
Right. Okay. So, but do you think there's a lot of self-diagnosis going on with people deciding that they're intersex?
Yeah, it's actually a really big problem. If you look at the UK government did a survey, an LGBTI survey. It was the first time they'd tried to include the I. And in their results, they said that it was evident that there were people using the word in a non-medical sense. And so therefore they were not the intersex people they were looking for. And that the data then was meaningless because there were obviously people who weren't intersex answering on behalf of intersex people. And then there's also, there's been, and that's just like things I've observed, but there've been studies into this. It's the people, because they're medical conditions that involve the genitals, people have like a weird fascination with them. So there's a history of people pretending to be intersex going back years and years and years. And there's been papers written about it, and it's especially a problem online that there are people who will they make up these like fantastical, like they won't claim to have an actual DSD. They will make up some like bizarre like combination of sex characteristics. So like they were born with like, you know, like 2 penises and like 3 uteruses and like were able to self-pregnate themselves, and like just really like mad fantastical stories.
And of course, that's not going to be good news for people who actually have conditions, who do need help and who do need clear information.
Well, yeah, I mean, what they found when they've done studies into like the factitious disorders, as they're called, so the made up ones, that quite often, because people believe it must be true, so these stories get amplified, especially the more extraordinary stories, because they're, you know, ghoulishly fascinating. So you end up with people who are pretending to have something that doesn't exist, becoming the spokespeople for those of us with actual medical conditions and needs.
Wow.
Yeah.
And you used to be very frustrating to trans rights activists because you had a real intersex condition, and you would more often, every time I think I saw the word intersex from someone, it would be followed a few minutes later by you correcting them on either what it meant or what the treatment was, or especially the idea that it meant there were more than 2 sexes. And of course, they finally shut you down, as they did me. What did they shut you down for?
I don't know.
Oh, really?
They accused me of having multiple accounts for harassment purposes, which I appealed, and they like sort of revoked that decision, but just banned me for another reason. They then said I'd had multiple violations, which I hadn't. I'd had one previous ban, which they had overturned, and then the ban. So they just didn't like my.
And are you a nasty and horrible person online, or were you trolling?
I'm quite
people?
Argumentative. I wouldn't I wouldn't deny that I'm quite argumentative, and I used to get really angry with people, but I was never abusive, and I never went looking for a fight. And you know, it's the usual thing, you get accused of transphobia, but I rarely actually spoke about trans people. I was mainly talking about intersex, but the idea of an intersex person saying you don't speak for me is transphobic. So
there are a number of things I know about, but only in a very vague way. But I know that there are some things that do happen to intersex people that are terrible. Can you go into that a little bit? I don't want to be ghoulish. I just want to show that there are serious aspects to this that are being ignored.
Well, I think the one that most people know about is the surgeries that happen on babies. So they have their genitals surgically altered to look like more typical.
Yes.
And there's a misunderstanding about that. I should probably explain that as well. People think that this happens because the babies have genitals and we don't know what the genitals are. It's not that. It's that the baby has a penis that doesn't look like a typical penis, or a clitoris that doesn't look like a typical clitoris. And so they are cosmetically altered when they're babies to look like typical ones. There's no medical need for that. Sometimes there might be, if like with boys especially, if because the urethra is in the penis. So if there's a problem with urination, obviously there might be a need for some surgical intervention. But most of the time there isn't any need. Or also the removal of gonads from intersex children. So some intersex girls are born with internal testes, and they might be removed. And again, there's not necessarily a need for that. Although sometimes there can be. But,
right. But this is used. I know that this is used to justify the term assigned at birth. The
Assigned
idea
at
that
birth, yeah.
the idea that our sex is actually assigned by doctors at birth and not observed by them.
The most extreme end of the surgeries would be when a baby boy would have his penis removed and then he will be raised as female, which is obviously a terrible thing to happen. And that's what assigned sex means, because that child is not male. They have had a female sex surgically assigned to their bodies. So yeah, it's lots of people who have been through that don't appreciate the language being applied to everyone, because obviously if that's what happened to you, you need your own words to describe that, because that's not what happens to the rest of us. Yes. So yeah, that's where the language comes from.
Yeah. And also the amount of people this covers is infinitesimally small, isn't that right?
The surgeries are incredibly rare. You hear the 1.7% statistic. The 1.7% includes a lot of medical conditions, and actually the intersex is supposed to be about medical conditions that are there at birth. Even if you might not find out you've got it until later in life. Like with me, I was missing internal organs, and no one thought to look for them, so I didn't find out until later.
Right.
So children who are born with like a visible difference. Yeah, sorry. In the 1.7, 1.5 of those is a condition called late onset congenital adrenal hyperplasia, which actually doesn't happen until later in life. So it's that they like those people have no difference at birth. Even if you went looking, they wouldn't be different at birth.
Yes.
So actual people who are born with a difference at birth is 0.2% of the population, but that includes people like me who look like any other girl when I was born. When you get down to ambiguity, so the ones who are born with different looking genitals, that's it's incredibly rare. Yeah, it's like 0.02% of live births.
And obviously these people, it's such a rare condition that you have to be very, very specific when you speak about what they're going through and what they go through. So this widening out of the term so that it just means anyone who feels different is extremely damaging. Yeah.
And we have, what gets lost in all of this is that we are people with medical conditions, and a lot of our needs and issues are nothing to do with identity or sexuality. We have our needs arise in a medical situation. So we need help understanding our diagnosis. We need help coming to terms with that diagnosis. Quite often like I found out at 18, I would never be able to have children. That's quite a life-changing thing to find out at 18. And there was no mental health support for me, and there was no peer support. I was just sent home, and myself and my family kind of just stumbled our way through understanding it together. And that's not uncommon, and it's terrible. And no one ever talks about these things. We're just brought in, look at the people with the odd genitals, and we can't tell what sex they are. And that's not actually who we are.
Yeah. It's interesting, isn't it, that we've gone from never hearing the word intersex to hearing it all the time, but it's being applied in a way that's incorrect.
In an incredibly unhelpful way, yeah. And many people who fall under that word do not use it for themselves.
Yes. Why not? Why is that? Because
it's incredibly stigmatizing. I wouldn't use it. To be honest, in the real world, the only time that I would talk about it would be in a medical setting, and in which case it's not a medical term, intersex, so it's no use to me. I would use DSD in my diagnostic label.
DSD stands for difference in
sex development.
Yeah.
Or disorder in sex development, but lots of people don't like disorder.
Okay.
But yeah, so and lots of people, again, because of this idea of it being somewhere in the middle or some mix or something, lots of people with DSDs don't feel that way about their body. So they don't want to use that word to describe themselves. But as far as they're concerned, they are male or female.
Yes. Yeah. That's another interesting aspect to it, that the that desire they have is being kind of trounced, I guess, by this insistence on using. By what? Sorry.
It's being queered.
It's been queered so that it means, like trans, it can mean anything. It can mean absolutely anything.
Well, you now have where they like broadening it again. So you have people with things like polycystic ovary syndrome now self-identifying as intersex, and which it's and polycystic ovary syndrome is a horrible medical condition, and of course women with it should have all the support that they need, but they not under our umbrella, because that's not what we're about.
Yeah.
And you just think, where does that stop? Are we going to get like men with erectile dysfunction? Can they now, or a low sperm count, can they now call themselves intersex too? If if there's anything that's going on with like that system in your body, that's it. You can now have that word.
What kind of ways do you see intersex as a term being misused by people who are arguing online on the other side, trans rights activists? How is intersex used by them?
Well, just in the way that I said, that people will say there's people like the sex is binary, and they'll say, but what about intersex? It's really just that, it's playing the intersex card. Well,
the reason I ask is simply because I've seen you fight this for years, and it doesn't seem to get into their heads. So I'm just kind of wondering what kind of varieties of argument you see that you find particularly frustrating or annoying.
It's the same conversation every time. It's the same because it's central to their political aims. Yes. Without they cannot argue for gender identity to be the way that we are organized without getting rid of the idea of sex. So it's just every time it's that same conversation.
This would be the same kind of philosophy that led to Rosie Duffield getting monstered for talking about having a cervix.
Women have cervixes. Okay. So that's an example. Because there was the CNN who said people with cervixes, and everyone got upset. And then the trans people, it was to be trans inclusive, and then the trans people, their thing was, but what about intersex people?
Right.
Because you get male intersex people with cervixes, which is true. There is a condition called PMDS where a man can be born with they're called Eulerian structures, so cervix, uterus, fallopian tubes, no ovaries. But he's not going to go and have a smear test because he also has a penis and testicles. The speculum has got nowhere to go.
Right.
It's really disingenuous to include these medical conditions because they don't need including. You're not doing it because people with these medical conditions are asking for it, or because they need it, or because they will benefit from it. It's purely just to advance the argument. Because I think the pushback quite often against the trans stuff is that thing of God, we're just, everyone's sort of fed up of having to walk on eggshells or change their language. And then so their thing is kind of it's not just us though, we're doing it for the intersex.
Right. So it's kind of like they're using intersex or people with DSDs as a shield. As a kind of conversational shield. Which
is, to be honest, in that regard, is completely unnecessary. I don't have a cervix, so I don't need inviting for cervical screening. But I wouldn't expect my GP to say then we won't invite any women because it might offend Claire. What I need it tailored to me, so I just get taken off the invitation system. That's how it should work.
Yes.
And I think, to be honest, I think trans people should do the same. I think again they're tiny numbers, so we shouldn't be changing everything for them. Yes, they need consideration in their healthcare, but that should be tailored and individually to them, not that we change everything to the detriment of the majority.
Yeah. Where do you think the idea comes from that everybody, the rest of society, has to change the way they behave and talk and categorize people, rather than they need to have specific care? Why is that? Why has that become a thing?
I think it's the whole language of validation, isn't it? That everything must validate the identity. And therefore, Freddie McConnell, the Seahorse dad, wrote a thread today saying how he has a cervix, and so therefore he expects the language to accommodate him, which is ridiculous because well, you have a cervix, Freddie, so you need cervical screening. That's not, when we do a public health campaign, we're not trying to reach the people who have cervixes and know that they need to go for screenings. We're trying to reach the people who don't know they have cervixes and need to go for screening. But it's that, and the whole thread was just this whole like center me and my feelings in everything you do, which is just ridiculous, absolutely ridiculous. Yeah. It's incredibly narcissistic, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, I thought also the desire to be named as the father on the birth certificate was also a example of supreme narcissism, because
it's the baby's document, not Freddie's.
So how can the conversation change to actually accommodate and help people with intersex conditions?
It needs taking out of politics, really. What other group of medical conditions do we politicize in this way? We don't. It's they need to stop politicizing our genitals and people. And if you want to talk about intersex stuff, maybe talk about the issues we have, and look for, I think, a lot of, there's a lot of institutional capture, and this is true of intersex orgs as well. A lot of the main orgs now, the people who are there speaking for us are self-identified intersex, or are people who do have DSDs, but they identify as queer, which is like represents such a tiny number of us. So try to also look out for, there's charities like DSD Families who are actually representing people with their medical conditions and their needs. We're so woefully funded as well. Like we get, there was a study done, and they of like the entire LGBTI like global funding, intersex gets 1% of that.
Right.
And then you think, and of that tiny 1% we get, a lot of that is still going to LGBT orgs.
Yeah.
To advance their agendas. So actual money going to, and I know like money's not the be all and end all, but people have to.
No,
there's a lot of work, and what intersex or DSD advocates want to be doing is they want to be talking to doctors, they want to be talking to mental health professionals, they want to be able to set up peer support groups, things like that. And it's work. And I think that if you want to help intersex people, they're like the things that you need to be talking about, because they're the actual issues.
Yeah.
But you can't make people do that. You can't make people there.
Isn't it now in the alphabet? LGBTQI, isn't I after Q?
It's been in there for a while. The history of how that happened is unclear. I think we kind of got dragged in with the T.
But again, it looks like it's there for purely ideological, political reasons.
It's tokenism.
There's no other medical condition.
No. Diabetic or something.
Yeah.
And it's weird that it's in there. Even a lot of the queer intersex orgs now are beginning to question the wisdom of LGBTI inclusion, because it has not done anything for us, and our issues are not talked about. And what good is a parade? What is that? Because we don't need to be going out, and I understand the concept of pride for gay people. And like the history of it as a protest and what have you, but it's such a bizarre, nothing about LGBT really sort of I just look at it and I just think, I don't know, what am I doing there? I'm a straight woman, right? I was just born without some body parts. I don't need a fucking parade in the rainbow for it.
Yeah, unfortunately at the moment it seems that it's not going to be depoliticized, because it's such the kind of incorrect use of it is so valued by trans rights activists. What can people do to counteract this?
I think it's quite difficult. One thing I would say that people need to avoid doing is getting into debates about how intersex people are classified, because that's really crass. Like working out what sex we are might be complicated, or the way our chromosomes match our body parts might be complicated, and like debating therefore whether we're in the right category, like just like don't do it. It's not necessary, because it doesn't matter. We're not debating what letter is put on the birth certificate of a baby born with a DSD. We're talking about how we accommodate adults with different identities within society. So I think people, if they can, to avoid getting into those arguments. And really, if you go, there's a thing called the Malta Declaration, which is a consensus statement from intersex organisations. There are some things in there that I have some issue with, but there is a statement. If you scroll right down to the bottom, if you Google Malta Declaration intersex, it'll come up. And if you scroll right down to the bottom, like the last point, it says about not instrumentalising intersex for other political aims. And really, that's kind of all that needs saying is, look, this is what these people don't want you to do this. It's nothing to do with them. And they always go, oh, but my intersex friends, they'll invent some intersex friends. But you can just go and be aware of like these like consensus statements that say like this has to stop. And really, that should be all that has to be said.
Yeah. Are you?
I know that won't be accepted by everyone, but you know.
Yeah. So this is something I might start asking people at the end of these interviews, because I'm genuinely curious. As someone who's been in this fight for a while, do you think things are changing a little bit? Are people? I mean, from your point of view, are people beginning to? Do you see more people beginning to push back on some of these kind of unscientific claims? Do you think things are moving a little bit?
Sure, yeah. I mean, I got involved, I think, like 3.5 years ago.
Sorry, that's for me.
Like, is that you or is that me?
No, it's you.
I got involved 3.5 years ago, and I knew nothing, and most other people knew nothing. And I do see like there's more intelligent discussions and more people able to say this isn't right when something is put in front of them that's not right. And I think there are more people talking about it in general. And I think because I think things like being told you're a cervix person, it upsets a lot of people because it's their bodies, and you know, who are you to relabel them as a non-woman? Yeah. But I think as well, because there's been quite a lot of like J.K. Rowling obviously recently came out full turf or whatever, and I think that has raised a lot of awareness. I know like this week William Shatner's been he's right. Dipped his toe in. He's had a dive into the deep end, hasn't he, over the worst.
He really has, there are so many more people being brave now and talking about the things that are not quite right, and as there should be. And I look at the numbers now. I remember like when I got involved on Twitter that, you know, there were maybe like, and I'm sure there weren't, I'm sure there were others, but of the people I networked with, there was maybe like 100 of us at first who were really sort of vocal. And you look now and there are thousands of people who are right.
And there's also like I've spoken, like I was chatting with a gay guy the other day, and he was saying at one point he was like trans women and women in these like awful turfs, and then he was like, and then I realized, you know, that they expected me to like lick vagina. and that's not happening. And I think because also I think they get quite emboldened, like more people begin to see like the more mad aspects.
Yes.
Which is very helpful for people who are fighting against them, obviously. Yeah.
I know. I mean, for years, you and I know that when you point out the madder aspects of this stuff, that people either don't believe you or they think you're mad yourself, or you're just saying it out of bigotry. You know, so it's great that this is happening. Well,
I think it changes all the time, doesn't it? I was thinking about this the other day with the kids stuff, and when I got involved, I remember getting into a discussion with a trans activist about medicating children. And getting into a discussion with quite a few trans activists about it. And their whole thing was like, oh, no one's doing that. No one's doing that. Yeah. And then suddenly all the kids were on puberty blockers. And you sort of think, well, you were like 6 months ago, you were telling me like this was no one's intention. And now suddenly they all are. And then, so then like you start worrying about the surgery and you get, well, no one's doing that. And then you go and look and it turns out, you know, kids are being operated on.
Well, that's the thing about that is so upsetting about this, is how they will make up stuff from moment to moment that suits them. So they'll tell you that kids aren't getting surgeries, and then they'll tell you that it's absolutely crucial. They'll tell you that kids aren't taking puberty blockers, and then they'll tell you it's crucial that kids take puberty blockers.
Yeah, and that they've been doing it for 30 years or something. The entire narrative.
They just make it up as they go along. I often wonder who is gaining from it. I mean, it's all so chaotic and unhelpful to everyone. The only people, it seems to me, who are gaining from it are the people who rule these online spaces. These kind of people like Arthur Chu, that fucking guy. Yeah. Because they kind of have a command of the kind of reality denying postmodernist way of thinking. They can kind of, I don't know, keep producing hot takes, I
don't know. I think
the latest one is 2 + 2 = 5.
Yeah, I don't know how you explain the Arthur Chus of this world, because he's very good at retaining things he's read, obviously, but he's not an intelligent man.
No,
he's not, and he's not capable. Like, you have a conversation with him, he is not capable of adjusting, because he's just regurgitating something he's read. So he cannot, when you point something out, he cannot adapt to the new piece of information. It's not just him. You find that a lot.
Oh yeah, that's the general way they have. It's all these thought terminating cliches that we keep seeing.
I think it's quite an odd thing, because who benefits? And I think there's probably lots of answers to that question. I don't think it's simple, but I think you're sort of right as regards online trans activism. I tend to think of Twitter as being like a game, rather than I know it's a social network, but it is like a game, and there are people on there who are playing it like a game. This is their hobby.
Yes.
And you knock your opponent out, and you get more likes than them, and you deploy all the tactics that will cause that to happen to get someone ratioed or whatever. And there's a really strong element of that within trans activism, because so much of it is happening online. And they are not people who are doing it because they care about trans people. I think that's really important to note. They're doing it because it's a way to play their game, to fulfill their hobby and annoy people. Often women. That's quite good fun for them, but just to annoy people online.
Jane Claire Jones said in an interview I did with her recently that it's not just one thing. The phenomenon is not just one thing. It's
absolutely.
Neither of us now are on Twitter. We both have to have real lives. Exiled. But one thing I would like to do is I would like to do a kind of a round table of a lot of people who, like you, a lot of women mainly, who've been chucked off Twitter. So I hope you'll join me for that at some point. And,
that would be cool, yeah.
Yeah, I think it should be good. And in the meantime, Claire, thank you so much for talking to us. And I hope that the day will come where you don't ever have to talk about this stuff ever again.
Thank you very much. That is my aim in life.
All right, lovely to talk to you. Thanks, Claire.
And you too, bye.